Today I'm speaking with Micheal Scott Moore. In January 2012, Micheal was abducted by pirates in Somalia. He was held captive for over 2.5 years. In preparation for today's conversation, I listened to a few of Micheal's previous interviews. What surprised me most, beyond his incredible story, was how he recapped such wild moments of pain with a hint of humor. Micheal usually appears lighthearted and positive. At times, he would even crack jokes about the soccer jersey he was forced to wear in his hostage ransom video. It's very interesting to watch, and I'm thankful we have Micheal with us today. Micheal is the author of 3 books, most famously The Desert and the Sea, his best-selling memoir about captivity in Somalia. He has shared his story on major platforms, including The Daily Show with Trevor Noah and the Joe Rogan Experience. He has also presented lectures at Google headquarters and, of course, his very popular TED Talk. This episode is a strange one. I really tried to keep it lighthearted despite such a dark subject matter. Finally, to celebrate the new show, I'm giving away a PlayStation to one of my viewers. All you have to do is like and subscribe. That's it. Details in the comments. Now please welcome Micheal Scott Moore to the Welcome Home podcast. Where do you think our American, or in my case, Canadian fascination comes from with pirates, whether it's movies or books or so many people being drawn to your story? Where do you think our kind of fascination comes from?
Well, I mean, I shared that fascination as a kid. I think it's the same thing as a fascination with dinosaurs. They don't exist anymore.
Okay.
You know, it was something that was very. First of all, when you draw a pirate or make a pirate Playmobil figure or whatever, you're drawing something that's so flamboyant and something that, first of all, is also lawless. So that works a certain appeal, and I think just that these things existed and they don't anymore is what fascinates kids, and that's obviously what drew me to the story too, because there they were again. And I was particularly interested in what Somali pirates had in common with old-time pirates, because that was one thing people played down in the media. They say, well, these guys aren't romantic swashbucklers, they're just brutal. And I thought about that and realized, well, that's nonsense, because pirates of old were brutal. We're inclined to think they weren't, because there's 300 years of romance that we've allowed to grow up in the meantime. But in fact, they were quite brutal people. And I've written an essay about that. After I moved back to LA, I went to Disneyland and rode the Pirates of the Caribbean and wrote an essay about what I thought.
Let's start with the day that kind of changes it all. I was curious, looking back, if on that day you had any concerns, if there was any feelings, or if it was pretty sudden what happened. Can you walk me through the day that kind of changes your whole life?
Sure. Yeah. So Ashwin, my partner, was leaving a couple days early to go to Mogadishu. So we had to take him to the airport. The airport was just outside of town. And we drove up there and got there before the airport had even opened. There are so few planes that go in and out of Galkayo that you can get there before the airport is really opened.
Wow.
So we sat around, and so finally somebody opened a tea counter, and we had some tea, and some other people came there and sat down. And one of the Somali kids, a guy, maybe a teenager, maybe 20, heard me say my name. I think I gave my card to one of our fixers, part of our entourage. He asked me for my business card, and then he read my name out loud, and the kid said, "You're Micheal Scott Moore?" I said, "Yeah." What do you mean? He said, "Well, you're famous." I said, "No, I'm not." But I knew what that meant. I knew that implied that my name had gone around as the identity of one of these strangers in town. I mean, Galkayo doesn't see very many people from outside the country. And Ashwin and I were both strangers, and people knew we were there. But that meant that there had been research about me.
Is it fair to say that that research stemmed from your security crew, the people that you paid to protect you may have given up this intel?
Uh, Actually, the security guys probably wouldn't have known my name. They just knew Michael. They wouldn't have known, how to identify me or how to look me up. But there were clan leaders and people close to my actual fixer who could have figured that out. Uh, so our main fixer was a Somali we knew from Berlin, and he had other fixers on the ground who lived full time in Somalia. They sometimes had to deal with our IDs to just to book those plane tickets, for example. That circle became leaky, and I'm pretty sure that's how things started to go south.
When you say a fixer, do you mean like your guide, or is this somebody like what do you mean when you say fixer?
It's a journalist term, just for a guide or an assistant. So the guy who made the trip possible for us was our main fixer. He was Mohammed, but he's a Somali who lives most of the time in Europe, and he translated for us. He was from the town, he knew the town, and he belonged to the clan that was hosting us. So he fixed it up so the clan could consider us guests, and that's how it was when we landed. Those were the circumstances.
As you look back, do you have a suspicion or an idea of where that leak, the main leak, happened that led to this?
Yeah, one of the guys kind of on the ground, um, a full time, a guy named Hamid who lived in Somalia full time. Um, I suspect, 'cause he was handling our passports and stuff like that. I suspect the conspiracy to pick me up, or to pick both of us up. They wanted both of us. Probably he was probably the weak point, and um, I mean, what also had to happen was the pirates had to actually offer our local clan enough money to turn us in. So it would have been more than just him. It would have been um, a team of guys who otherwise could have been um, our security guards turning on us. So it was a betrayal.
Can you walk me through what's going through your head, how this all happens? I understand you were in a vehicle. Were you pulled over? Was there a roadblock? Can you walk me through what's going through your head in real time?
Yeah, we drove back from the airport after Ashwin got on his plane, and it was on that sort of dusty path that a truck was waiting for us, and it had probably been waiting for us since the morning when we drove up to the airport, but we took a different route. And I know all this detail only in hindsight.
Mm,
All I know is that there was a truck. It was more than a truck. It was a technical with an anti-aircraft cannon mounted in the bed. A bunch of guys, maybe 12 Somalis with Kalashnikovs waiting in the back. It's not an uncommon sight. Somalia still has a civil war going on. So a technical, which is a battle wagon, um, it's not unusual. But it was waiting by the side of the road, and when it saw our car, it moved up to us and actually or backed up to us and actually aimed that cannon through the windshield. So we
wow.
stopped, and my security guard was also overwhelmed, and that's when it started. I mean, it took me a minute to realize what was going on. I thought, well, okay, traffic stop, no problem. I can show people some papers, whatever. That's not what it was.
And those first few days, your book is called The Desert and the Sea, which kind of implies a land and a water-based operation. You didn't go straight to the ship, or what was that first week like logistically?
Right. So the gunmen, they ripped me out of the car and they put me into another car and they drove me into the bush. And there was a camp somewhere out in the middle of the desert bush where I had to stay. There were a couple of other hostages, and although they took us to a house for a couple of days, the next morning we spent the next several weeks basically camped in the bush in different places. Um, it was like bivouacking with soldiers. It was, you set up, you're with a bunch of guards who have guns, They give you a thin foam mattress, and they themselves sleep on the ground or whatever, and we just rough it. That was basically how they treated most of their hostages. And I think we stayed out in the bush, sleeping under the sky at night, or under trees, until February. I was captured in January, so probably a full month. And then it rained, and they brought us back to a prison house, a house that was not furnished, in Hobyo. The town turned out to be Hobyo, where we were. Hobyo is a pirate town on the coast. And then we moved around a bit, and between houses, and then out into the bush again. And then finally in April, they put us on a ship.
So when you get on that ship, what is daily life like? I assume, like, what are you eating? I assume there's no entertainment. You're not able to speak to anybody. What is the daily life once you get on that ship?
Well, actually, on the ship, you could talk to other people. That was okay. They did want us to keep quiet when we were on land. They were afraid that the aircraft was going to hear us or something. On the ship, it was a tuna vessel, a 50-meter industrial tuna ship. It had been caught out near the Seychelles, not really in Somali waters. But it was a Taiwanese ship, and it had an East Asian crew. So 28 guys, all from 5 different countries.
Wow.
The Philippines, Cambodia, Vietnam, and mostly China. 10 of them from China. And we couldn't talk to them except for the Filipinos. Nobody had any English, but and I learned a few words of Chinese. But they couldn't talk to each other either. The Cambodians didn't speak Chinese. The Filipinos didn't speak Khmer or Chinese. So they had an onboard pidgin, a sort of language that they had developed on their own, like all crews, throughout history do. When they can't talk to each other one way, then they come up with a mix of languages to talk to each other in some brutal way. And that's what we did. We had to learn that language. I was placed on board with one of the other hostages from land, a fisherman from the Seychelles, and we had to learn the language of these kids. They were all, men in their 20s, and they were very sweet guys, actually. But you had to learn to talk to them. So, and we were all sort of hemmed in on one work deck, maybe a 40 by 40 foot work deck.
Okay.
Near the front of the ship. And we spent most of the time outdoors or under a roof at the very front of the ship. And eventually about 10 of us were ordered to go and sleep in cabins at night. And I think that was a protective measure in case the ship was raided.
And what are they feeding you guys? How are you guys staying fed and hydrated?
Well, on land it was terrible. On land it was, pasta and very little else, plus cookies and juice and stuff like that. I mean, it was just rudimentary and not very healthy and never enough. On the ship, there was enough. The ship had just been hijacked. It had been hijacked maybe 3 weeks before we got on board by the same pirate network, obviously. And their kitchen, which was full of Chinese food, was still operational. So they were doing 3 meals a day from the kitchen. Maybe one meal we would actually cook. We also caught fresh fish from over the side of the ship, so we would actually cook fish stew on little electric woks up where we were living. So there were all kinds of food possibilities, and a lot of them were fresh. It was not a bad place to be a hostage, actually.
I've heard you mention some sort of leaf that the crew members or the guards would be chewing as almost like a narcotic.
Yeah.
Was that a big part of that culture? What exactly was that?
It was khat. It's a leaf called khat. It's common throughout the Muslim world, but especially sort of dry places where that are near enough to mountainous places where this stuff grows. And it's popular in Muslim cultures because it's not alcohol. You can get a buzz, but it's not haram. And it's a narcotic leaf, but it gives you a high at first. I mean, it's almost like coca leaf because you get really high and jittery at first, and then you crash. and then you wake up depressed and you need more. So it's a real brutal cycle of addiction, and it doesn't take very much. I tried it a few times, but never enough to get addicted. These guys would sit in front of piles of khat and eat it. They would have to just munch it like cows. And they had to have it every day. So even while we were on the ship, there was a daily khat delivery from the land. A little skiff would come up, and they would throw these bundles of khat up onto the ship. And that was part of the economy of running a pirate group. The men needed their khat.
It's fascinating because you speak about that leaf very rationally and level-headed, but
Hmm.
I assume 99% of people that are incredibly stressed out,
Hmm.
there's a great deal of uncertainty, they don't know if they're ever going to see their family again, would
Hmm.
say, "Hey, there's a substance that's almost in
Hmm.
abundance. I'm just going to submit to this and hopefully it's going to numb this experience." So one of the things I took a note, I said, you are one of 100 or less that would deny that over fear of addiction.
Right. Well, I knew. I mean, I know about addiction. My dad was an alcoholic, so I was afraid of getting addicted. The thing is that um, you could see. I mean, you could see the effects of the addiction right in front of you. I mean, the shambles of Somalia was not unrelated to the fact that a great many Somali men are addicted to khat. I mean, it's a feedback loop. Obviously, not everybody would be addicted to khat if things weren't so hopeless economically, but you had the results of it right in front of you. So I wasn't particularly tempted to just spin off into space every day. But there were a few guys on the ship who didn't see anything wrong with it. They were Cambodians and one Taiwanese guy. They sat in the corner and they would take a certain amount of khat from the pirates, whatever the pirates were willing to give. It was never very much, but yeah, they had some every day. And I think that ended on land. I don't know if they were allowed to do that after they were on the ship.
So how does the first point of contact, how do the initial negotiations start? Who are they calling? Is it the US government, German government, or is it a family member to try to start to get a price point?
Well, before I got on the ship, I waited a week for a phone call and price point. Um, they put a phone in my hands after the first week, and I thought that was a really long time because there was a week of being a new hostage and not knowing what on earth was going on. And in a way, it was worse after the phone call because they handed me a phone and said, call someone. I said, well, you need to give me my backpack. You guys stole my backpack, all my notes. I have some numbers I should call. And like, we don't know where it is. Call someone. Well, I only had one number in my head, memorized from before cell phones. Well, and that was my mom's phone number.
Wow.
So I called mom. But by then, everyone knew I'd been kidnapped. The FBI had advised my mother. They had. I'm also a German citizen, so German officials had tried to guess where a phone call might go, maybe to the Spiegel offices. So everybody was ready for a phone call. Nobody knew where it was going to come. It should have gone to the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, where I had a grant. But went to mom. So she was on the phone, and she remained on the phone. She was the person that the pirates called if they wanted to negotiate. But their first,
What do you tell your mom and how does she respond? Was she calm and cool because she was prepared or did you hear something in her voice?
oh no, it was awful. I mean, of course, I heard the emotion in her voice. I could also hear that she was doing things that weren't typical. So I knew that she was being advised. I didn't know who it was. Didn't know um, who was giving her, a checklist kind of thing. Um, but the the price point, I mean, the first demand was $20 million, and that staggered everybody. I mean, I was stressed. My mom was stressed. My mom couldn't believe that figure. My mom was functional on the phone, but you could tell that she was distraught.
What is the policy for the US or Germany to make payments? Is it a no-go whatsoever? This is something that would have to be private, your mom, your family. your friends, or was the U.S. and Germany going to step in for some sort of funding or rescue?
No, the policy is not to pay,
Wow.
in both cases. So the stated policy in both countries is to not pay. But they do have, you know, response teams. They do have people who can step up and help both a family, um, and you know, like a business, um, figure out how to respond. So they're the you know, there are experts in kidnapping in any given government who can sort of help things along. But yeah, that doesn't mean that the government steps in to pay. My mom had to put together a fund, basically.
Wow. So you hear this $20 million figure. That seems like a insane figure to request.
Well, yeah.
Is there a point where you're losing hope? Is it right when you hear 20 mil, or is it down the line when negotiations aren't very fruitful? What's the point where you think maybe I'm not going to get to go home?
uh, my heart dropped when I heard 20 million. I mean, nobody was going to pay that. That was not going to happen. I thought everyone knew that, including the pirates, but the pirates just seemed to sort of dream up these numbers. And I don't know how calculated that was, or um, but somebody had to think that up, you know. Once I heard that, I figured I was probably going to be in Somalia a bit longer than I thought. You know, I was hoping for some sort of quick resolution, hoping against hope. I mean, I knew that these things didn't get resolved quickly. But when I heard $20 million, I thought, oh my gosh, it might be a long time. Um, and in fact, the pirates didn't budge from that demand for the first 8 or 9 months. So,
I actually I have a note here, and this could be just an internet myth where they came with 20 mil, and after 8 months of negotiations, they went down to like 19.8 mil.
that's what happened. But there was very little. So there were phone calls, but there was very little actual negotiation in between. Yeah, I was on the phone every couple of months, you know, and the pirates just didn't budge from that first. That incredible. You know, you do start to lose hope the longer that goes on. You think, okay, well, 20 million, but they'll come down to 10, you know, pretty quickly. But they didn't.
Now that you were home, you've researched this, you have your book out, and you've done a great deal of podcasts. Is that $20 million figure even have any grounding in reality
No,
from in comparison, or
no.
what is the average ransom that they're requesting?
I I think that even then they knew that the average ransom for a Westerner would have been around $1 million.
Hmm.
Um, and I knew that too. I mean, I knew it in a ballpark way. Um, I don't think that anyone thought it was going to be, you know, 5 million, or you know, I figured 5 million would be their opening gambit. You know, but what do I know? The only thing that 20 million has in common with anything else is they asked 20 million for two fishermen from the Seychelles that I was held with at the beginning. So the first two
Wow.
hostages I met, their opening price was 20 million for two guys. And then when I got on the ship, I realized that the price for the entire ship, so 28 guys plus the ship, was 20 million. Or 20 million for the crew plus 20 million. You know, they just sort of took 20 million and used it like a building block. Um, and when they broke it down, they divided up the 20 million into little, you know, pieces for each hostage on the ship, each of those East Asian crew members, to demand from their families. And each number was different according to the wealth of the country they came from. So the Cambodians had the lowest ransom demands. I think the Chinese had the highest. I'm not sure. It was in the hundreds of thousands in each case. And in each case, the effect it had on the hostage's mind was, that's fucking crazy.
Hmm.
So it didn't matter what the figure was. It was once the hostage heard it, it was like, how on earth is that ever going to happen? So it was the same effect for each of us, no matter what the price was.
I've heard you say that stoicism was something that kept you level-headed. I'm very fascinated by two things in your story. Obviously, your story is incredible and unfathomable, but your ability to stay level, to deny the use of a narcotic in the most stressful situations, talking about stoicism, and obviously, your sense of humor. You keep a light heart with a lot of this. So,
Mhm.
what was the strategy of staying level? Keeping faith that you're gonna see your family again. Was it stoicism, or was there's something else in there?
None of the above. So I didn't stay level. I didn't stay
Okay.
level-headed. I didn't maintain hope. I didn't. I was not confident that I was going to see my family again. I mean, none of that. It was no. It was desperate. I wanted to. Within the first few months, I wanted to kill myself.
Wow.
I wasn't sure I wasn't going to. And then I got on the ship, and actually life improved. As soon as we moved onto the ship, I thought, okay, now forget it. They're putting us on a ship. They're going to take us to some remote part of the Somali coast, and I'm never going to see my family and friends again. Turns out the ship didn't go anywhere, and I made 28 good friends. The time on the ship turned out to be better than the rest of the time in Somalia, and it was not the horrible development that I thought it was when I first. And I was thinking, now that I'm on the ship, I'm just going to end it. Um, but those thoughts came back later. I mean, when I was off the ship and on land again, things got worse, and I became very thin and very weak. My muscles atrophied, and I was in a state of rage for the first couple of years. I mean, it wasn't just desperation and depression, but it was rage at the pirates. And it took some mental work to get out of that state.
Did thoughts of suicide or thoughts of a suicide mission, was that a one single low point, or were these frequent thoughts?
They were. It depended on the phase, but they were frequent during some phases, and then less frequent during others. Um, and uh, I wasn't sure that I was going to make it emotionally, or um, let's say if a rescue attempt happened and there was a violent um, raid to get me out, that I was going to survive that. Hostages don't always survive such things. So I was not confident at all, even towards to the very end, that I was going to get out alive.
Was your anger ever directed outside of that boat, whether it's the government not stepping in for a rescue mission or support financially? Because I just imagine thinking, yeah, where's my Canadian government right now? I thought they might be able to help me. Was the anger ever outside of the boat and on people you expected or hope for help?
No, not at the government per se for doing more. I mean, I got myself into that mess, so I wasn't thinking, why aren't they splashing out? I mean, I certainly didn't want anyone to give these pirates, $20 million or $10 million or even five. And I certainly didn't want a special operator, for example, to die in a raid to rescue me. That would have weighed on my conscience immeasurably. Um, I mean, the anger was certainly at the the pirate bosses. I mean, I knew more or less who was responsible. Not the personalities, but I knew how a pirate gang was structured, so I knew where to direct the anger. Of course, the guards with guns, they were the most immediate targets for anger, but I knew that they were in most cases poor guys who didn't have any other chance to make a living. But that didn't help. Most of the time, most of those guys were also just sort of idiots. So not all of them. In fact, I got to be friends with a few of my guards, but
Wow.
I also knew that they weren't running the show. So the anger, went up to the top of the pirate um, organization as far as my thinking was concerned.
I couldn't you're going through so much pain, but I couldn't imagine the pain the people back home, your mom, your
Yeah,
family, your friends are dealing with. I think of my mom. If I was in that position, she would be probably more stressed out than I would be in that
yeah.
situation. So now that you've gone home and some time has passed, have you talked to your mom about what that was like for her and what she was really going through and if she's kind of come to peace with it?
She has. I mean, it's. She was definitely a hostage for 2.5 years too, and she describes it as sort of walking around in a fog. When she had to be on the phone, she was really good. I think the FBI was impressed with the way she behaved when it came to actually talking to Somalis. Um, but she was in a state of, you know, grief and uncertainty the whole time. It ended when I came home, so it really did. I mean, she said it was such a relief not to have to check her email every morning and stuff like that. She came to see me in Berlin when I got out and all that. Um, and yeah, I mean, she lives a mile away from here, so I see her frequently. And sometimes we do talk about it because it's interesting to talk about the same story from two sides. And sometimes we still learn things, but emotionally, I think she's doing fine.
Speaking of two sides, when you go on YouTube comments or Twitter, there are these two very polarized sides in terms of your story. There's
Hmm.
one side that says you put yourself in insane risk. This
Hmm.
was a mission that was doomed from day one. And there's a whole other side that supports and says if there isn't journalists willing to take quote unquote insane risks, the
Hmm.
Western world would not be exposed to some of the things that are going on. Do you see both sides of that? And
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, of course, it was going through my mind for 2.5 years. What a stupid thing I just got myself into. I didn't have to come to Somalia. But it's absolutely true that if journalists don't go to places where it's difficult to report, then those places become dark. They become benighted. They become ununderstandable to the outside world, and that's not a good thing. I don't read those comments on the internet. I ignore them. But um, I would have to say that it's just true that you need journalists to go to places where most people are not willing to go, precisely because people aren't willing to go there. Otherwise, um, you let that chaos that I was talking about earlier, that the world seemed to have been descending into. This is in the first decade of the 21st century, not never mind now. You're letting that take over, and that's not a good thing. You don't have to risk your life, but um, I think in general, being able to understand a place, even when it's extremely obscure and extremely difficult, is a good thing for the rest of the world. I mean, it's a good thing for American society, certainly because Americans don't get out that much.
as I'm hearing your story, I wonder how corrupt is Somalia? Because if you were to get kidnapped in country, example, whatever, I imagine those governments are going to connect. The US government is going to call country blank. The police force is going to be trying to pursue to find you. There's relations between two countries. Am I super ignorant for even asking where was the government in this? What is the police force stance on pirates? What's Somalia like in 2021?
It's still basically an anarchy.
Wow.
There's very little government rule. So we went to a town called Galkayo, which was the capital of a region in central Somalia. The capital at least had a government. We talked to the president of Galmudug, which was the region. But the president of Galmudug was essentially the mayor of Galkayo, right? I mean, that joke has been used before in Somalia. Um, there, his power didn't extend very far outside the capital city into the countryside. And there was a point when we drove, before I'd been kidnapped, we drove out to the coast, where it really there really was no government control. And then the pirate towns on the coast had none. The pirates were running the towns. In fact, the
Wow.
pirates, just like um, the pirates are not terrorists, but just like terrorist organizations all over the world, or organized crime organizations, they not only commit these incredible crimes, they also try to organize things in a town or a region, and support poor people and stuff like that, so that the local people let them work there. you know. So in the vacuum of um, government power, where there was no government power on the coast of Somalia, the pirates stepped in. So the men with guns, fill that vacuum, which is why anarchy is such a bad thing. You want a legitimate government structuring things instead of the criminal structuring things, because somebody's going to do it.
So if pirates had a terrorism designation, would the U.S. and similar countries have more intelligence? What's the status of the intelligence for Somalia? Because it seems like they didn't know where you were and how they could help you, even if they wanted to.
The Western governments,
Yeah.
I think they knew where I was.
Oh, you think so?
I think the Americans did most of the time. Maybe not 100% of the time, but they had pretty good planes. We heard drones and we heard surveillance planes overhead. So they I'm sure they drew up a plan to come get me. But the pirates kept moving me around. That was one problem. And what? So sorry, what was the other part of that question?
I was wondering if or why pirates aren't designated as terrorists.
Oh, the terrorism part. Um, so they're not, because it's not an ideological act when they kidnap a person. They were not after me to change American government policy. When ISIS captured James Foley and eventually beheaded him, ISIS wanted Obama to quit bombing ISIS. They had a political goal. They had an ideological motivation for taking hostages, which was completely lacking with some Somali pirates. They really just wanted cash. They wanted nothing but money, and from that point of view, the governments in the West regarded them as criminals rather than terrorists.
Is their entire business model based on hostages and ransom, or do they have
No,
other income sources?
right? No, they're businessmen. So the pirate bosses, what we call pirate bosses, are like warlords in Somalia. A warlord is nothing but a businessman with a team of armed guys. So a businessman with a small private army to protect his business interests is what we call a Somali warlord. That's how you do business in Somalia. I mean, if you want to be a big player making a lot of money, no doubt stolen, you become a warlord, and a warlord with slightly different tactics, maybe slightly different gunmen, can also be a pirate boss. Um, and these pirate bosses have their hands in other businesses, including human smuggling, by the way. I've written about that since then.
Wow.
Pirate financiers turned out to be busy on the path for migrants from East Africa up to Libya. Not all the way over to Europe, but the African part. Um, and gun running and drugs. So they're like organized criminal. Piracy is organized crime, and just like a mafia gang, they have a whole portfolio of businesses.
So let's talk about getting free. How does the negotiation happen? How is it organized? And what's the final price you guys settle on?
The final price was 1.6 million, which still staggers me. I mean, that still seems like an enormous amount of money. Um, and it had to be delivered in cash. I'm not quite sure who delivered it. But on the day I left, the pirates told me, "Michael, you're going free," and I didn't believe them. I'd heard that too many times already. So they eventually brought me out of the prison house in a car and handed me over to another Somali in the bush. And once they told me they were doing that, I said, "You've sold me to another gang. You sold me to Al Shabaab or something." Al Shabaab is the terrorist network in Somalia. And then I got into the other car, and there was just this one guy at the wheel and no guns. And he's like, "Yeah, you're going free. Your mother's in a hotel here in Galkayo." I said, "Jesus, will people stop lying to me? Tell me what's going on." And he put my mother on the phone. So
Wow.
that's when I knew it was actually happening. And she said yes. And there was another negotiator on the phone too. They said, "Yeah, you're going to a hotel first. You're going to switch cars again. You're going to go to the airport. And at the airport, you're going to meet a pilot named Derek." And Derek was terrific. Derek was the only guy standing except for some guards on the perimeter. The only guy standing outside a Cessna airplane at the same airport, same airfield where I'd said goodbye to Ashwin, 2.5 years before. And first thing he did was take my picture, and he said, "This is for your mother."
How do they safeguard that cash, and how do you trust people that seem to not really have morals for a proper business transaction? What if there's a payment and then they keep you? Were those any thoughts your mom or the negotiators
Yeah.
had?
Oh, for sure.
Safeguarding this deal seems very sketchy.
Yeah, it is sketchy, but the pirates, since they have a business model, they know that once there's an agreement, they have to stick to it. Otherwise, they'll just get shot up by governments that don't trust them. And that's also a solution, by the way. But I, uh, yeah, they were really nervous before. In that entire time before that Cessna with Derek piloting me lifted off, they were nervous, um, even though it all seemed to be going according to plan. Um, they were nervous about anything because in Somalia, where it's so chaotic, anything can go wrong.
So your first week free, is it you have a nice meal, you enjoy things, or are you talking to psychologists? Are you trying to slowly ease your way back into things? What does that first week free feel like?
I mean, fantastic. It was first a couple of days in Nairobi, um, in Kenya, right next to Somalia, where I just sort of cooled off and talked to some people on the phone, including my family. And then I flew to Berlin, and I mean, I couldn't walk very well. I was so weak that I couldn't walk more than a couple of city blocks. And in Berlin, you walk, you don't drive too much. It's easy to get around on foot. Um, I mean, my family descended on Berlin. The German part of my family came out from the Rhineland, and my mom came out from California. And so every morning we had breakfast together. That part was great. There was a psychologist. I talked to him every day, and I started to debrief. I mean, the FBI wanted to know the story, so and they needed to hear it as quickly as possible. So I spent a few hours every day telling the whole story from start to finish.
So the FBI needs that story in case there's a future situation. They're trying to gather intelligence, or what's the FBI asking you?
They certainly want information about how the pirate gang works, but they're also interested in prosecuting some of the guys that were
Oh wow,
involved. And two men now are in jail in America. There should have been a trial last spring, but COVID got in the way. The trial will still happen.
wow. Speaking of those guys, this could be a myth. I'll ask you to debunk. Is it true that after you get home, one of your guards messages you on Facebook?
Yes, yeah. Um,
Where do you take that? What's going on exactly in that situation?
um, so he was one of the gentler guards, and he messaged me on Facebook, but I didn't see the message for a long time because we're not friends. We're still not friends on Facebook. But he messaged me, and I found it in the other folder or whatever, and late a month later. But I started to write to him because uh, I was just curious what he had to say. I was curious what he wanted, and I was curious. I had some questions about what I had just been through, and some questions to help flesh out my book. So I had a personal motivation to do it too. But basically, I kind of wanted to know what the deal was. He thought we were pals. I think he thought that we could be buddies.
So to send you a Facebook message in a friendly way, do they believe what they're doing is morally wrong? Or is that
No,
just how business gets done?
I mean, I think their own poverty justifies it in their own minds. I think he was poor. Um, that's what he says. He not all of them are poor, but the basic foot soldiers are pretty poor. Sometimes they get into it just because they want khat. I mean, khat is enormously expensive, and that's one way to become a pirate. Is one way to have a steady supply. Um, but you know, joblessness in Somalia is a real problem. So some guys who have no other skills besides using a gun will naturally gravitate to groups like pirates or Al-Shabaab, which is a religious terrorist group, but it's basically also organized crime. These guys feel justified not just because of poverty and the incredible, difference in wealth between their country and the West. I mean, they really do think that some of that money can just sort of splash over in their direction. Also, they think it's okay to kidnap infidels. My pirates were more religious than I expected. They're Sufis, and Sufis are supposed to be, not fundamentalists. But some of my guards would sit down and read the Quran and say, "Well, look, right here it says you can take an infidel hostage," and it does say that in the Quran. Um, there are many ways to read that and many ways to mitigate it, but these guys really did justify what they were doing in part by saying most of our hostages are infidels.
Wow. Yeah, as you were speaking, I was going to ask you about where religion stands in all this because I understand the justification based on financially, but once a religion gets involved, there's got to be some moral standards. But I guess you could read different texts in different ways in that case.
Well, of course, they all interpreted their own religion in a self-interested way, but they have older people telling them these things that these things are okay. Also, and I mean, you can say it's not religious or it's not Islamic, and that's true. I mean, I think the legitimate way of interpreting Islam and all the great religions are, trend towards peace. But there are verses in the Quran that are not peaceful, and when a leader wants to bring some people over to his side to conduct something violent, he emphasizes those verses. So it's not, these things are not outside the religion. They're part of the religion. So it's difficult, and I go into this in great detail in my book. I mean, I wanted to grapple with it because I considered it a really serious topic, and I don't want to be glib about it. So I spent pages on it in my book.
So I also read this could be a myth as well that after the money comes in, they get their U.S. cash. They end up having a almost war about it, and some
Yeah,
of the pirate leaders end up dying.
yeah, that's true.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
not all of them. The top guys probably got most of the money in the end, but there were two factions. One of them had control of the money. The other, had to roll up and make sure they got their share, and they had a disagreement about the shares. So apparently there was a standoff that was, a standoff with guns that was broken when one guard shot a pirate, one of the nastiest pirates actually, and that led to a shootout where a total of 5 men died in the end. And they were all ranking pirates. So in the end, what I was fearing, I was afraid of a raid because, maybe I would get killed, but certainly the pirates I knew would get killed, the foot soldiers. Whatever, they got themselves into it, so if that's the wages of sin, then whatever. But that would have weighed on me too. It never occurred to me to hope that the guys who would actually get it for, actually get killed as a direct consequence of my case would be 5 bosses. Those are the guys who richly deserve it. So that was a strange coda, but also slightly gratifying once I had time to think about it. Not in the moment. The whole thing was very, very painful and strange.
I told you this offline and off air, but I was incredibly fascinated with like your sense of humor. Whether it's on a podcast or your TED Talk, you're making fun of the soccer jersey you're wearing, you're making fun of certain things. How does somebody get there? I know it's been many years. How does someone go through something so dark and maintain this sense of light and almost humor in retrospect?
Well, I think it's a dark sense of humor. So it's a way of, it's a way of negotiating that stuff. It's a way of actually um, understanding it, but also a way of meeting it. Because the whole situation was also absurd. I mean, it was horrible, and it was criminal, but it was also absurd. And that was, I noticed the absurdity while it was happening. And like I said, I think in one of the talks, um, a sense of humor is also a form of detachment. It's a way of standing outside yourself and commenting on what's going on. So it's, in other words, it's a way of not sitting in that painful place all the time. It's a way of stepping away. And that notion of detachment became very important to me. I think I said that I had been in a state of anger for about 2 years, but I was held for 2.5. So at some point in the early-ish 2014, I made a very deliberate point to forgive my guards, to forgive the guys that I was seeing every day who were making my life so miserable. So I thought. They were not obviously in charge of making my life miserable. And it turns out there was another way to approach that horrible situation. And that other way is what saved me. I mean, I did not pick up a gun and shoot them or shoot myself precisely because I forgave them. Made a conscious choice to wake up in the morning and not be miserable, not just be full of vengeance and full of self-recrimination and depression. So that also is a kind of detachment. Being able to forgive is also a way of plucking yourself out of that immediate situation and saying, well, wait, the response here can be slightly different. And you mentioned stoicism. Stoicism is not a way of plowing through with no emotions. It's meant to be, it has this reputation of being sort of masculine and not very emotional. It's the opposite. Stoicism is also a way of detaching yourself from a situation and thinking about it carefully and learning how to respond to it without an immediate emotional response. So all those things, you can line them up, are how I survived. All those things are aspects of a detachment that I had to cultivate, or else lose my mind.
That's beautiful and incredibly well put. Let's wrap up with a question that I feel like only you can answer. It's the idea of how fast our minds can adjust to complacency. I'm very guilty of this in my own life where I say,
Mm-hmm.
if I have this accomplishment, I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
be happy. And then you do it and then you start complaining. I wonder, after the 2.5 years of hell that you go through, how fast you notice yourself getting complacent to your new circumstances. You're at McDonald's and they mess up your coffee and you freak out. You know, how fast does the mind adjust from extreme pain to a great standard of life?
I don't know. I would say it took me a year to recover physically, and I'm not totally sure I'm recovered mentally. I mean, when something like that happens, your emotions freeze. They freeze at a certain point, and because you cannot express that anger. Um, I mean, I found ways to do it anyway. I did mouth back to my guards, but you can't be as angry as you want to be, and so you have to freeze in that position. And that process of unfreezing emotionally is a long one, actually. So, in fact, because of it, I might have a short temper. Not all the time, but um, uh, I would say I got used to it and felt more myself after about a year. But that was work too. I mean, exercise and other things. Um, and now, yeah, I mean, when something's difficult, I have to say, well, it could be worse.
Michael, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I love to hear you talk and your stories. And I really thank you for joining me.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you, Tax.
To celebrate the new podcast, I'm giving away a PlayStation 5 to one of my viewers. All you have to do is like and subscribe. That's it. Full details in the comments. Good luck.